GatorChatter.com presents the Oxrageous podcast.
The sportos, motorheads, geeks, sluts, bloods, wastoids, dweebies, they all adore him. They think he's a righteous dude.
And here is your host, Aaron Bland.
Hello, Gators. This is Aaron, and you're listening to yet another edition of the Oxrageous podcast. This time for Kentucky Week. It was a fascinating weekend in college football, and personally, I think the weekends where Florida plays either some total patsy or even worse, an FCS team like we just had, it's a total waste of a weekend. I hate the matchups. To me, there's pretty much nothing to gain and everything to lose. The only thing to really gain is to get the players a little more experience. Hopefully, some of the players that don't get to play very often, very much experience, which would hopefully serve a purpose later in the season. Of course, in the last decade, those games have been way too close, usually, for us to get any of the backups in. This particular one had a hideous start where Florida looked like they didn't really want to be there, and considering the opposition, they probably didn't. But then things picked up steam, and we got to see a lot of the backups play in the second half, so that was a good thing. However, I'm just glad it's over, because to me, the performance is really meaningless. The stats are completely meaningless. It's a waste of a weekend. And I really found myself watching the Tennessee Volunteers and Florida State games, switching around, because I found, one thing that never changes with me, that watching those two teams lose isn't quite as enjoyable as watching the Gators win, but it's probably closer than it should be. I probably get more enjoyment out of it than I should, particularly the Seminoles. The Tennessee has been so bad for so long that them losing has become such commonplace. There's not quite as much satisfaction in it. Florida State, that feeling never goes away. I want Florida State to lose every game, regardless of the circumstances. If Florida State winning meant that the Gators would go to the national championship game, I would still pull for FSU to lose. And, of course, watching FSU blow the epic lead against Boise, and here they were 21-point favorites or something against Louisiana Monroe. At home, if you want to call it that, there was almost no one at all in the crowd. They get up a decent amount, then throw a pick six, and suddenly here comes Louisiana Monroe, just marching through Florida State's defense, just like Boise State, like they weren't even there. And they've got tremendous athletes there in Florida State. Overall, in the last 10 years or so, they've out-recruited Florida. There's no excuse for Boise State and Louisiana Monroe to have 400, 500, 600 yards on those guys. As lousy as their offense is, it's really their defense that's been more appalling. At any rate, the game goes into overtime. Louisiana Monroe scores and has a chance to go for two and end it right there. Here they are, a big underdog, a team on the road. They've got nothing to lose by going for the win right there. And that coach runs the kicker out there who shanks the extra point. And the 1,500 or so people still in the crowd rushed the field and tried to tear the goalpost down, because beating Louisiana Monroe these days is tougher than it should be in Tallahassee. But anyway, what I was going to say was that coach, I can't even remember his name. His name doesn't matter. There's a reason why he's coaching Louisiana Monroe. And what you saw is a reason why a coach like him will never rise above the level of Louisiana Monroe. In fact, this is the kind of guy that ends up in high school in 5-10 years. Playing not to lose in a situation like that there's just no excuse for it. And really, they should have fired him and run him out of town right there. On the plus side, Florida State gets the embarrassment of almost losing that game, and it's certainly obvious to the nation that team is in absolute shambles right now. As for Tennessee, another team who had a lead against another lousy team in BYU and let it slip away in front of the home crowd, it's just really enjoyable. As mediocre as the Gators can be, they are Alabama in comparison to those other two rivals. If only Georgia was in the tank, we'd be in heaven these days. Oh, and I also wanted to say I got a lot of enjoyment over Butters, our good old buddy Jim McElwain at Central Michigan, getting beat 61-0 to Wisconsin. Now, of course, Central Michigan brings Butters in there. Oh, boy, he's going to turn the offense around. Well, we've heard that before. Talk about an offensive guru we're talking about here. And the Chippewas managed 58 total yards in a shutout to Wisconsin. I'll tell you what, it's a shame. It really breaks my heart, that kind of thing. And is anyone else following Kerwin Bell at USF? We got Charlie Strong at head coach and Kerwin Bell at OC. And I've found this kind of amusing and had kind of fun with it, even though I really don't have a problem with Kerwin Bell. But there's been a debate about Kerwin Bell on Gator Chatter for the entire 5 years Gator Chatter's been around, about why don't we hire Kerwin Bell? Not even as OC. We want to bring him in as head coach, right away. And Kerwin Bell has been coaching, I don't know what it is. It's basically glorified high school for several years and lighten it up. He's a genius. He's got an amazing offensive mind. He's another Steve Spurrier type. So finally, USF says, hey, maybe you get a good idea. Let's bring this guy in. They bring him in at OC, and what happens their first game? They get shut out. That would be 0 points. The next game, shut out in the first quarter. Finally, in the second quarter, his 6th quarter as OC, they kicked a field goal. Amazing, amazing stuff. And they ended up scoring a touchdown at the end of that game, and another loss, by the way, for USF. So that is 10 points for Kerwin Bell's offense in 2 games. Again, I don't have any problem with Kerwin Bell. I just found it amusing after all the debate all these years. Maybe he'll bounce back and show us all how it's done as the season goes on. Now, as for the Gators, we need to congratulate Felipe Franks for breaking the all-time record 93% completion percentage against a high school team. Yeah, it was against a high school team, and we threw 25 or so 2-yard passes in a row. But hey, a record's a record. I mean, that's something that Danny Warfel didn't do. Of course, Danny Warfel was actually trying to pick up first downs, but you really can't take that away from Franks. And there's no question he's rolling. I mean, he's going to roll into Kentucky and just tear them apart the same way he did that the high school team we just played. I'm not concerned in the least, and neither should you. As usual, there's been a lot of debate about Felipe Franks. I've started a lot of the conversation myself, as I'm just not feeling it these days, and I have a lot of fear that we are in for a painful experience over the next couple of months, largely due to Franks' limitations. I can say I hope I'm wrong, because I will be rooting for Florida just like everyone else. I just don't think I am. I said on the last podcast, I just don't think he's a fit for the offense. And I don't think Mullen's done enough to make him a fit for the offense. Overall, last week, the running game was pathetic. And there's really no excuse for it being pathetic. And it's going to get significantly harder against Kentucky's pretty tough defensive line this week. And I can be perfectly honest, this is my 30th year watching Florida football. And I have never really been nervous about the Kentucky game. I always just assumed we would win, and for the most part we have. This is kind of the first year where I'm a little bit nervous, despite the fact that Kentucky is starting some guy named Sawyer Smith at quarterback this week. And I'm just reading here a little bit. He first committed to Alabama to play baseball in high school, then committed to UCF to play football before ultimately signing with Troy. After graduating in 3 years at Troy, Smith transferred this summer to Kentucky to back up Terry Wilson. Should we be worried about Sawyer Smith? It certainly appears we lost Henderson for a while, which is another huge blow in these meaningless games that drives me crazy. Henderson probably shouldn't have even been playing in that last game. Meaningless, stupid, waste of time. The entire game was a waste of time. But to talk about the offense, I just have grave concerns about Florida being able to move the ball against Kentucky. I really see this as a really low-scoring game. Hopefully we're on the high end of it. I'm thinking a 13-10 type score. But Florida's had a lot of trouble running the ball, and this is obviously an enormous concern as, well, hell, 85% of the offense is being able to run the ball. P. Ryan just looks a little tentative. He looks a step slow. I don't know what it is. Maybe he can hit a big run and get himself going, because he's a better back than what he's shown so far. Obviously, the offensive line has been a big concern. A lot of these guys are new. They need to gel. They need to get a lot better. Kentucky's coming off a 38-17 win over Eastern Michigan, and Eastern Michigan is about 100 times better than Tennessee Martin. But they held Eastern Michigan to 49 yards rushing while running for 239 themselves. Kentucky obviously doesn't have Benny Snell anymore, who was a massive thorn in our side last year. He's taken his arrogance to the NFL, but they've definitely got a couple of decent runners still out there. Their starter actually is a guy named Asim Rose, who actually has been a mediocrity through a couple games to start the season, only averaging 4.4 yards a carry. But they got a guy coming off the bench called Cavassier Smoke, who's really had some big plays in the first couple games of the season, averaging almost 10 yards a carry. He's a freshman out of Wetumpka, Alabama. And it almost looks to me like he's the one who should be starting for Kentucky. But there's still so many factors we don't know about this team. It's great to be 2-0. I haven't been particularly happy about the football I've seen being played. A lot of people are in the same boat. At least we've won the games, and I can sit here and pray that Florida's going to get better. We're going to look better. We're going to roll through our SEC schedule. But boy, I can just sense some pain coming. Please tell me I'm wrong. Please tell me we're not going to have 12 threads on Gator Chatter pulling their hair out about Felipe Franks immediately following the Kentucky game on Saturday. Coach Mullen called a very conservative game plan last week, and there's so much speculation as to why. Why did you need to be conservative against Tennessee Martin? Why did you need to throw 20 passes under 5 yards? Does he not trust Franks to throw the ball, even against an FCS team? What's really going on? No one really knows what Dan Mullen thinks. My theory is that Dan Mullen doesn't like any of the quarterbacks. He doesn't like Franks, he doesn't like Trask, and he certainly doesn't think Emory Jones is ready. So he just plays it safe, plays it conservative. Let's not turn the ball over. It makes for some maddening football. I guess at the end of the day, you can't argue with wins and losses, but how long can they continue? Kentucky's sitting around watching game film this week. What are they going to see? What do they need to do to beat Florida? To me, the obvious answer, as it would be every week, is stop the run game. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. And it's up to Felipe Franks to make them pay. And maybe it's up to Dan Mullen to open things up a little bit. I had said on the last podcast, I think Franks should drop back and throw 10 passes over 50 yards down the field every game. A, he's got the arm that can get it there. B, it keeps defenses honest. C, if it gets intercepted, hey, it's just like a punt. What we saw last week was a complete waste of Felipe Franks' arm. And anyone touting the record he set against UT Martin is ridiculous. Give me a break. So I will go on record with my prediction of a Florida victory, 13-10 at Kentucky. I think it's going to be maddening. I think it's going to be ugly. I think we're going to pull it out at the end. At any rate, if you want to tell me I'm wrong, come on to Gator Chatter. That's what everyone else does. That's the name of the game. You have your opinion, I have mine. We'll find out who's right. And of course, if you haven't experienced a game at Gator Chatter, come on out. We have a lot of fun, a lot of complaining, even wins or losses. The complaining's the same, which is fine. That's what it's all about. That's what message boards are all about: is venting, getting it off your chest. And we commiserate together and we celebrate together. And immediately following the game, there's a lot of discussion, breakdown, analysis, a lot of free content. That's really better than the pay sites, at least in my biased view. And as usual, I'll try to get out a post-game podcast with my immediate reaction within an hour of the game. Thank you so much for listening, and go Gators.